I was right, and I told you so. Those are two of my favorite expressions. 'Cause I was right, and I told you so. Hello, my friend. It is Perez, the queen of all media, the original influencer, journalist, podcaster, and your number one source for everything It Ends With Us saga. Some of you will remember that back in June, I shared an exclusive, which now, 2 months later, has turned out to be accurate, as I knew it was. Earlier this summer, I told you all that other reporter, James Vituska from the Daily Mail, was going to recant his declaration, his sworn declaration to the judge. I did not know what exactly he wanted to change, but I was told by my exclusive sources as a reporter that was going to happen. And now it has. And talk about a curveball. But James Vituska is not being entirely accurate, and that irks me. So let's get into what he is alleging today. As had been rumored, but not confirmed until just now, Vituska is no longer with the Daily Mail. And just like last time when he swore in that declaration under penalty of perjury, James does the same just now, telling Judge Lyman, quote, "I am a journalist formerly employed by the Daily Mail. My responsibilities included cultivating sources in the entertainment industry, securing exclusives, and reporting accurately on matters of public interest." Just like me. Vituska also tells the judge, "I was thrust into the center of this consolidated lawsuit by the complaint filed by the Wayfarer parties and their attorney, Brian Friedman. I was the Daily Mail reporter that authored the text messages which appear at paragraph 193 of the Wayfarer party's amended complaint in this case. That amended complaint, which, by the way, is no longer in consideration, her bestie, her lapdog, Slimy Lyman, tossed that entirely in the garbage. But Vituska explains today, quote, "I signed a declaration that was submitted to this court on June 5th, 2025 by Leslie Sloan and Vision PR, the initial declaration. While true, the initial declaration did not include everything I wished to say. Before signing the initial declaration, I repeatedly raised to my former employer, the Daily Mail, that I wished to provide additional important information and evidence. However, the Daily Mail did not allow me to do so in or with my initial declaration." Shame on you, Daily Mail. Vituska continues today, "The initial declaration was prepared and presented to me under intense pressure. The attorneys who purported to represent me in drafting the initial declaration were appointed by my then employer, the Daily Mail. I was implored to go along with their draft and legal framing under threat that failure to cooperate would jeopardize my job and legal standing. That document appears to have been part of a coordinated effort to sanitize and reinforce a falsehood. While my initial declaration itself was not false, it did not tell the whole story. Dun, dun, dun. This is real bad for the Daily Mail, though. They must be today. Actually, not even today. They must know this has been coming. Vituska says, I have since been terminated by the Daily Mail after filing a whistleblower report regarding my initial declaration. I believe my termination was retaliatory, tied to my whistleblowing. I have since retained new counsel. Well, it sure seems that way. Could be true. Ay, ay, ay. And here is where Vituska clears the air. The false attribution. He tells Lyman, quote, having severed ties with the Daily Mail, I wish to further explain my communications with Leslie Sloan, Melissa Nathan, and Brian Friedman. I believe that my sharing the full context of these communications is necessary for the court and the public to understand the truth. In both the original and amended complaints filed by the Wayfarer parties and Mr. Friedman, I am described as having said that Leslie Sloan, Blake Lively's longtime publicist, told me that Miss Lively claimed Mr. Baldoni had sexually assaulted her. That allegation is false. I never heard Leslie Sloan make any such statement whatsoever, and I never said she did to anyone. Ay, ay, ay. James, that's not entirely accurate. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but the Baldoni Wayfarer parties included the following in their complaint. A text message exchange from the then Daily Mail reporter with Melissa Nathan, Justin Baldoni's crisis communications expert. He wrote to her, and I quote, she said, talking about Leslie Sloan, she said the whole cast hits. I think he meant to say hates Justin. This has nothing to do with Blake. And now she's saying that Blake was sexually assaulted. Why wouldn't she say anything about that then? She knows she is full of shh. She told me that the whole issue was that everybody hates Justin. Nothing about Blake and Justin. She said it has nothing to do with Blake. BS. So, at one point, James Vituska did communicate about Leslie Sloan, quote, and now she's saying that Blake was sexually assaulted. However, the reason for this declaration today is Vituska wanted to add more context, which, being Team Truth, I think is important. Vituska tells Slimy Lyman today, in my initial declaration, I said that I was the Daily Mail reporter that authored the text messages that appear at paragraph 193 of the Wayfarer party's amended complaint in this case. I said my use of the term sexually assaulted in those text messages was a mistake, and that I meant to say sexually harassed. I also said that Miss Sloan never told me that Miss Lively was sexually harassed or sexually assaulted. I stated that the Wayfarer parties and their counsel did not consult me about what I meant by my use of the term sexually assaulted in the text chain. I believe the impression that was left by my initial declaration was that I mistakenly told Miss Nathan and Mr. Friedman that Miss Sloan had told me that Miss Lively was sexually assaulted. That is not accurate. What the initial declaration did not convey is the following important additional detail. I expressly told both Melissa Nathan and Brian Friedman in text messages on December 25th, 2024, that Leslie Sloan never told me that Miss Lively was sexually harassed or sexually assaulted. My text message exchange with Miss Nathan and Mr. Friedman is attached as Exhibit A. All right, well, let's pause and let's go and look at Exhibit A right now. In Exhibit A, we see this Christmas Day text exchange. These people were dealing with this drama on Christmas Day. Yup. The first one to initiate conversation was Melissa Nathan. She said, James, Brian. She was introducing the two of them and connecting them by text message. Melissa added, James, I know it's the holidays, but when you can, would you be able to screenshot those texts you have with dates? Anything you have is helpful. Thank you times 1,000. Brian Friedman responded, thanks, Melissa. Brian Friedman, I really appreciate it, James. James responded saying, Brian, it will be easier to send you the screen recording of our conversation, which I scroll through slowly in the conversation. You can see that Leslie bashes Melissa. This is so juicy, y'all. I am living for this. La Diabolica's publicist bashes Melissa, tries to get me to say that Melissa was planting stories and bad-mouthing Blake. She also goes off calling Steph Jones a liar. Probably true. And never once did she mention anything about the sexual harassment. Here is the screenshot recording. And then he texted that to Brian and Melissa. And he continued to spill the tea on her longtime publicist, saying of Leslie Sloan, quote, many times she gives us information and then her client gets mad and then she comes back and says that she never gave it to us and it's a lie. I had many conversations with her about Blake and never once did she say anything about sexual assault. I had a 3-way call with her and Melissa and she never said anything about it then either. I hope this helps in some way. If nothing else, it shows she doesn't like Melissa and she tried numerous times to get me to say that Melissa was planting stories or that Melissa was bad-mouthing Blake after I told her countless times it was not the case. And she kept going. So, this confirms that the Wayfarer parties were not planting stories about litigious Lively. Win, I think. However, Vituska continues, telling the judge today, I have come to understand that the Wayfarer party's defamation lawsuit against Miss Sloan and Miss Lively was based in part on the allegation that Miss Sloan told me that Miss Lively was sexually assaulted by Mr. Baldoni. Not only did that never happen, I told Miss Nathan and Mr. Friedman in writing on December 25th, 2024 that it never happened. I was shocked when I learned that these allegations in the amended complaint were based on a statement that was never made, after I had been very clear about that with both Miss Nathan and Mr. Friedman. Once again, not accurate. However, James Vituska can get away with saying this because of the way that it was worded. I have come to understand. And if this moves forward, he would be asked, well, how did you come to understand this? I was informed by my lawyer. That's how I came to that understanding. However, I just so happened to pull up Justin Baldoni's first amended complaint here, and under the defamation cause of action, it doesn't even mention James Vituska or the Daily Mail. But you know what it does mention? The New York Times. This is exactly what it said. In Justin Baldoni's first amended complaint, quote, the Lively parties, which at the time included Leslie Sloan and Ryan Reynolds, who have now both been removed from this saga because Baldoni's complaint was tossed in the garbage by Judge Lyman. But back when that was still in play, they argued in their first amended complaint, quote, the lively parties made one or more statements to persons other than the Wayfarer parties, including, without limitation to, the New York Times, to the effect that the Wayfarer parties engaged in, permitted, and or failed to prevent sexually inappropriate conduct toward Lively and others, and that the Wayfarer parties retaliated against Lively and others for reporting the alleged sexual misconduct, including by propagating false and misleading narratives about Lively for the purpose of damaging her image and reputation. The defamation section in the complaint continues. The persons to whom the Lively party made these statements reasonably understood that these statements were made about the Wayfarer parties. The statements made by the Lively parties were intended to and did have the effect of exposing the Wayfarer parties to hatred, contempt, ridicule, or obloquy, I don't even know, who cares, or of causing them to be shunned or avoided, or of having a tendency to injure them in their occupations. Specifically, the persons to whom the Lively parties made the statements reasonably understood the statements to mean that the Wayfarer parties engaged in, permitted, and or failed to prevent sexually inappropriate conduct toward Lively and others, and that the Wayfarer parties retaliated against Lively and others for reporting the alleged sexual misconduct, included by propagating false and misleading narratives about Lively for the purpose of damaging her image and reputation. The statements made by the Lively parties about the Wayfarer parties were false. Furthermore, the Lively parties knew the statements were false or had serious doubts about the truth of the statements. The Lively parties' false statements about the Wayfarer parties to third parties were a substantial factor in causing harm to the Wayfarer parties' property, business, trade, profession, and or occupation. Expenses the Wayfarer parties had to pay as a result of the defamatory statements, harm to the Wayfarer parties' reputations, and, with respect to Baldoni and Heath, shame, mortification, and hurt feelings. Upon information and belief, each of the Lively parties was aware that the others planned to commit the tort of defamation against the Wayfarer parties, and that each of the Lively parties agreed with one another and intended that the wrongful acts pleaded herein be committed. Accordingly, each of the Lively parties is equally liable to the Wayfarer parties for the tort of defamation by reason of their conspiracy to commit the tort. The Lively parties have engaged in the above alleged conduct with oppression, fraud, and malice. Accordingly, the Wayfarer parties are entitled to an award of punitive and exemplary damages in an amount to be proved at trial. James, your characterization of this entire section, which I have read verbatim, is wrong. The Wayfarer parties did not mention you here. They did not mention the Daily Mail there. They did not even mention your assertion or what you did not claim. They were very specific with their wording. It was all related to what she herself alleged in her complaint, and then they just repeated that and clarified how that was all false and defamatory. But James would like us all now to see it differently, and he is mistaken. He also says, clarification of the record. To summarize unequivocally, Miss Sloan never told me that Miss Lively was sexually harassed or sexually assaulted by Justin Baldoni or anyone else. Melissa Nathan and Brian Friedman knew this as of December 25th, 2024. Pay attention. By filing a lawsuit based on falsely casting me as the source of a sexual assault allegation that's not what their lawsuit was based on, Mr. Friedman, his clients, and those apparently aligned or acting in concert with them have caused immense harm and, I believe, misled this court. They have damaged my reputation, cost me my employment, and undermined my career as a journalist. Are you following? Pin that thought. He wraps up things saying, I submit this declaration to ensure that the court and the parties have a complete record of my knowledge and that my name is not further misused in service of a false narrative or those who conceived it. I declare under penalty of perjury under the laws of the United States of America that the foregoing is true and correct. James Vituska. Yup, this is all about money. It seems apparent to me, my expert opinion is that James Vituska is laying the groundwork for a lawsuit against the Wayfarer defendants. I hear that song from Cabaret playing in my head. Money makes the world go round, the world go round, the world go round. And you know what? As I've said repeatedly, the only winners in this whole mess, the lawyers. Craziness. And I was right. Look at James Vituska clarifying, amending, changing, adding to his declaration, as I told you all he would. Boom. All right, my friend, thoughts on everything? Let's discuss in the comment section.